Hello, everyone. Welcome to Winthrop in the World. I'm Paul Baskin, and with us today is Jim Letterie. Jim is the town council president. He's just been reelected as town council president.
Yes.
Congratulations, Jim, on that.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it, and I enjoy being here. So thank you for asking.
You're welcome. So I guess one of the first questions is, to what do you attribute not just your win, but the size of the win? Not just for you, but there's a slate of candidates in the council that came on, sort of, that you ran more or less collectively together as, and you all did very well. What do you attribute that to?
I think it's just what the town wants, really. I mean, I think it's just, I'd be lying if I did not think 3A played a big part in this. I think this was a...
Maybe let's just quickly tell people, like the two people in town don't know what 3A, which is the housing law that basically requires every community in eastern Massachusetts, for the most part, not everyone, but almost all, to rezone to add more multifamily housing. Yeah. Most cities and towns around Boston have gone along with it. Winthrop is not, and you led a group that is determined not to do that.
Correct. There's 177 cities and towns, not including Boston. Boston is exempt. But yes, pretty much, if you want to call it a slate, I don't really look at it as a slate. I just look at it as people who had differing opinions. But there was definitely a group of us that were anti-3A, against 3A. Mm-hmm. And it seemed that the town resonated with that, right? Mm-hmm. And they kind of made their voice very clear as to their thoughts on 3A by some of the votes they took. Mm-hmm. I think some of it was just, in some circumstances, maybe time for change, and others, they liked the direction that the town seems to be going in. So it was, I think, a pretty convincing win. I'm very happy about that. I'm very grateful to the town for giving me an opportunity to serve another 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, we won't go on forever on 3A, but since you said you described it as anti-3A, and it sounds like there's people in town, there's a lot of people in town who don't like 3A, but thought that the town should go along with it. So yep. I don't want to beat this dead horse, but no. Again, but the reason it seems important is maybe it gets to the question of how sure you are that people really knew what they were voting for, because we would hear about people saying, I'm voting for this slate, if you want to call it that, because they're going to stop development in town, and that seemed to be like maybe the surface level impression. Maybe I'm wondering if that's what I'm going to ask.
No, I don't think. When I think of development, I think more of commercial development, but this is more about residential development, right? 3A. It's not about commercial development. And I think, in some respects, I think, like I just said, I think the slate, if you want to call it that, of us were anti-3A, or against 3A. I do agree that a lot of people feel the law is bad, but feel that they just have an obligation to comply because it's a law. I also think that, in some respects, it's still up to the citizens if they really wanted to change it. I mean, I think it's pretty clear right now. If there was a vote town-wide, I think it's pretty obvious where that vote would land. Yeah. But there's still an opportunity for people to have that happen. So as much as, it seems like the town wanted the majority of councilors who were not in favor of complying with 3A. If there was a majority of councilors who were in favor of complying with 3A, ultimately the town would still have the opportunity to have the final say.
Right, and the major cost, if that's the word to use for, of non-compliance with 3A is the loss of state funding, and that's an issue that also was sort of kicked around a bit before the election in terms of one side saying it was potentially very bad for the town in terms of what the cost might be for the townspeople. Others saying, well, we didn't really get that much anyway. What's the best information you can give the people of town right now in terms of what it really will cost us if this becomes the town's long-term position? And what to do about it? Where will that money come from?
Well, again, nothing is guaranteed in life. Grants are at the top of that list. Mm-hmm. We applied for a grant 2 years ago and didn't get it when we were in compliance. We applied for it last year and didn't get it because we weren't in compliance. So how much of that is true? How much is 100% based on 3A or not? We still don't know. We're still in its infancy. Do I think 3A will change? I strongly believe that it will change. I think it's going to have to. I think the state has to realize that this is not a one-size-fits-all bill. And I think they will come around and make adjustments and hopefully give certain exemptions to certain cities and towns that this just is not the right avenue to go. We have been so ahead of the scale in this in so many ways. We've created different districts. We've developed. our population is been very constant. Pricing in Winthrop has definitely been on the increase, as it is all around, and you want to look at more affordable ways. 3A is not an affordability issue. 3A is just a building issue. They just want to build, build, build. To think that the Commonwealth would allow us to do something and create 0 units when the main purpose of that bill is to create units, I think is quite naive. I do think overall we are going to continue to talk. We're going to have to, and hopefully come up with some sort of solution that will be basically an exemption for the town. I still believe strongly that that can and will happen.
Yeah, okay. Even though it sounds like most towns haven't complied, and there's really no movement, detectable movement in the legislature to do that.
There has not, and I think you're going to have to see more state legislatures look after their cities and towns that they're representing, and maybe go to bat a little bit stronger for them. Okay. I know Representative Turco has been 100% supporter of the no to 3A, so to speak, side. Mm-hmm. And he's incredibly articulate on everything, but incredibly articulate on his reasonings. But, obviously to look at a bill that 4 years ago or 5 years ago was established with 3 grants, and now they just keep raising the grants, who's to think it's not going to change again? Yeah. And we certainly are still moving forward with everything we've planned on doing, and continue to do so.
So what's on the top of your to-do list now that you have another 2-year term as town council president?
Well, I think top of the list right now, obviously, is to continue the fire station, make sure it comes in under budget and on time. And so far, that looks like that's going to happen. We still want to, and I've said it from the beginning, and people believe it or not, we're still going forward with projects at Tileston, Girdlestone, and Pico.
This is flood level.
This is, yep, drainage, and that will be discussed actually at tonight's council meeting, the next step. So 100% want to go forward with those projects. We still have to continue to work on the Morton Street issue. That is not going to, I'd be lying to everyone, no matter who was in this seat, to think that that's going to happen overnight. Right. It's an issue that we still have to deal with. There are definitely things that the town could do on its side, in terms of flapper valves and such, that we can, help mitigate that issue. And we will continue to look into that. So there's still plenty of work for us to do.
So I try to get past 3A, but since you mentioned the fire station and the flood, well, those are both areas where it sounds like we need state money. And so on the flood sea level rise, what's the alternative? I mean, this is going to be most of the cost of this kind of work was going to be coming from state money.
I do not think any time it was said that most of the cost would be attributed to state money. No, we don't even have a final cost on what, potentially if you're talking about that, you're talking more about Morton Street than you are Tileston and Girdlestone, right? Okay. Tileston and Girdlestone is going to be a project that will probably come in somewhere, including Pico, will come in somewhere in the $4 to $5 million range, right? Would it be great to get some sort of grant money? It would be. Do I still believe that we absolutely won't? I don't necessarily believe that. But either way, these projects have to be done. I'm still looking at ways that potentially we could fit some of this into the operating budget, but there still might come a time when, to do some of this work, you're going to have to go out for a debt exclusion with or without a grant.
Yeah. Okay.
The grant was never intended. I don't think anybody ever had the thought that a grant was going to pay for the big percentage of any of these projects.
Well, those were the numbers, right? In terms of, I think it was like $12 or $14 million from Morton, and I thought a lot of that was coming from the state. Is that not correct?
That's not correct.
That's not correct.
I mean, I've heard numbers of $50 million for Morton Street. There is not a definitive number for Morton Street, and there is definitely not a definitive number of what we would have or might or might not have gotten for a grant. On Tileston and Girdlestone, I've heard of potential grants that are out there for those type of projects that could be in the $250, $500, maybe if you're really lucky, $700,000 range. Not that that wouldn't be fantastic, and definitely would help. Right. But it does not pay for even 50% of the project.
Okay, so you don't see the situation in 3A in any way kind of slowing down the town's ability to fix these areas of town?
I don't see it slowing down the ability as of now. Could it in the future? It could, depending on how 3A drags out.
In the fire station, there's no 3A effect there?
There's no 3A effect there. The only potential effect with 3A there is a grant that we are still working on and hope to potentially still come to fruition for a $2 million for demolition that could help us in that project. There were no other grants tied to 3A or anything else that are going to help us with that project, but there is still a possibility that we can receive that $2 million.
Because it's not tied to 3A?
No, it is tied to 3A, but I think it still could be, no, I'm sorry, it is not tied to 3A, but I still think that there's a possibility of us getting that grant.
Yeah, okay. The turnout in the election, it was about a third of the town, is that right?
Yeah, the turnout was really quite impressive, I think. A little over 4,000 people voted. There's a little over 15,000 registered voters. So yeah, you're looking at 30%, 29 point something percent, I think, which was incredible when you look at other cities and towns, and even look at Winthrop in recent elections for just municipal elections.
That feels high to you, a third of voters?
I think it feels incredibly high. I mean, my thought was going in, it was going to be between 39 and 4,100, and it ended up a little north of that.
Why would a third of voters be a good,
I think you look at a city of Boston election, you get 17%, 15% turnout.
You're talking about non-presidential kind of election, yeah. Okay.
And I think 30% is incredibly high.
Do we have any sense of who in town, if a third of the town voted, who are the 2/3 in town as best you know? Or, I mean, any way to sort of classify them, either by anything, race, gender, situation?
I mean, I'm a numbers guy, I'm a people guy, so I will, and I'm hopefully getting that list today of the people who actually did vote. Obviously, we don't know how they voted, but we know who voted, and you could kind of break it down. We don't break it down. The town doesn't break it down in terms of age or demographics or areas of town, but you could look at, it was an election though, when usually you'll have precincts 2, 5, and 1 are usually your biggest numbers of voters, and that was accurate in this election too. Some of it is because precincts 4, precinct 6 didn't have councilors that were up. Right. They were just town-wide races. So obviously with 2, 3 had more votes than usual, and that's because there was because there was a precinct race in 3. But usually 2 and 5 are the most active, with 1 being right up there.
Is there anything you can think of that you or the town could do to help get these numbers up? Outreach or whatever?
Again, I think that's very impressive. If you look at other cities and towns in the Commonwealth, I think that's quite impressive. I think that's a huge accomplishment to the showing that people's interest is pretty high in this town. You'll have a lot of people that are, weather could be an issue for some people. It was very windy and cold. A lot of kids are at school and didn't get absentees, right? So, that could be 1,000 people right there over the last 4 years that have graduated. 600 people, whatever it might be. But so there are a lot of different excuses. Sometimes people are just away. It is easier to vote now, right? Because you have the early voting. And I think we had roughly 450 either absentee voters or early voters. So that helps too with the count.
Do you support early voting?
I believe in voting on election day, but I do support it. I think is a need for it in a lot of circumstances. I would wish it would be used for, people that we're just older people, older generations that just can't get out of their house, or it's great for kids that want to be involved that are away at school and stuff like that.
So we've talked about the tone in town before, and I wonder if this is maybe a good point to just sort of look back now and maybe assess what we just went through. Does it feel like this was an election or a moment in the town that brought it together in any way, or in any way improved these concerns, or what?
You're going to have people, no matter what the situation is, no matter who won, that people are going to be disappointed and people who are going to be elated, right? I don't think it brings the town together in any way, shape, or form necessarily. I don't think the town was that split, and I've said this before. I think there's a relatively small number of people on both sides of an issue that are very loud and that you hear their opinions constantly. I think the vast majority of people, and we were talking a little bit about this before we started, if you look at the questions that were on the ballot and some of the questions that didn't pass, and I take responsibility for that, just not getting the knowledge out there enough about what these questions were, because they were relatively simple questions, but people just didn't understand them, and people really want to take the time to think about it, and they're reading them as they're voting, and the time's going by, they have people behind them. I think they rush sometimes, and I think a lot of them err on the side of caution and saying, if I'm not really sure, maybe I'll just vote no,
Right.
instead of maybe not voting.
And you're talking about the two at the end that were about, they were simply going to convert paper notifications to electronic notifications, just a basic normal thing that we have.
Yeah, it is. When we started the charter 20 years ago, internet was in its infancy, and we said that anytime there's a special meeting with any multiple member body, policy-making body, that a special meeting had, the members of that body had to be notified literally by mail. Somebody had to hand deliver it. And we were just changing that to email, and people said no.
So I gather that one of the things that come up early in the new year is commissions. Is it a time where you appoint a lot of commission members to the various boards and so forth around town?
There'll be most of the boards in town expire. Their terms expire June 30th because we're in a fiscal year instead of a calendar year. The town council committees, the subcommittees, will be appointed in January, and they're appointed every January, as well as the town vice president.
Okay.
Council.
I wanted to ask more about the commissions because there's been talk, and we've seen it, that it's some of the same people. I mean, there's some people who are serving on several commissions, whereas other parts of the town, people have no involvement. I guess part of that is people are busy and can't do it and that kind of thing. But do you have any sense that when you look at the commission appointments that have been going on, that something needs to be done to somehow get more involvement?
No, I mean, we just talked about the questions, right? And how many times we talked about them at every council meeting, but there's just such a small percentage of people that really are active in the council meetings, and I think the same applies. We say it all the time. We have openings on whatever, ABC commissions, committees. Please apply to the town clerk's office, and it's usually the same people watching over and over. It would be nice to have a better outreach to get some new, fresh faces in to maybe share different ideas and such. But I encourage people always, you could go to the town's website. It always shows any boards or committees with openings, with vacancies, and we always hope that somebody would put in that, we're appointing somebody tonight to a board and committee. So, there's the boards and committees expiration terms will fall on June 30th. However, there are boards. Finance Commission still has one open seat. Licensing might even have another seat. So there are boards and commissions that are looking for people that just we can't fill the vacancies.
Right, but I'm thinking of the people in town who just live their lives, do their job, take care of their kids, just don't check. They don't check the town website to see these things. Is there any way that the town can sort of do something more to try and find these people and encourage them and get a broader cross-section of who's doing what in this town?
As I said, I think a lot of people aren't involved, but I think people that want to get involved are going to reach out. I don't think that there are a lot of people that want to get involved but just don't do anything. If they really want to get involved, they're going to reach out. Now, it might not be to me or to you, but it might be to somebody that's going to get information to us, and that does happen a lot. But I don't know what we could do short of, put it in the paper, put it on WCAT, have it at message boards around coffee shops and such like that.
Right. Well, one of the things, and then you talked about changing the town council makeup to shrink it from 9 members to 6 and basically get rid of, remember getting the numbers right, 9 to 6, and then get rid of the
9 to 7.
7, and get rid of, either get rid of or shrink the geographic.
Yeah, I think what's up, and this is not mine per se, this is from the Charter Review Committee. The thought was to go to 6 at-large councilors.
6 at-large.
And 1 council president. So right now there are 6 precincts, 2 at-large, and 1 council president. You always obviously need a odd number. So the thought that came out of the Charter Review Committee was to go to 6 at large, figure in now, instead of just being in a precinct, anybody from around town could run. So that is now we're still waiting to get clarification on that, because the thought process is that's not something that we could have just put on the ballot like the other questions, and we have to create a charter commission to look into that.
Right, so what I would ask is sort of even more big picture. There's also been talk about whether, at least among some people in town, whether we should go back to a town meeting style government, which is obviously used to be a lot more common in New England. I guess one, if you have any thought on that, or any other way. I mean, should the town have a mayor? Should we maybe align more with other towns? And we've been doing that in some certain areas for certain projects. I mean, in other parts of the country, the government is much more county-based, so that you have, you're not trying to replicate the same machinery for a small town like we're doing here, and save money that way, or have more efficiencies that way. Is there any sort of big picture solution you might think
I don't
of?
think on a major scale. We do regionalization in some things like reverse 911 and stuff like that. That does save us a decent amount of money and it helps us. There was, like everything else, there was issues at the beginning because now a 911 person is calling an emergency and you're saying, for example, I'm on Pleasant Street and now this person doesn't live in Winthrop and doesn't know where Pleasant Street. So they've ironed out a lot of those. But regionalization works in a lot of ways. It doesn't work, especially for us, where we're a city technically, but known as the town of Winthrop, and we really want to keep that small town feel. And everybody around us is more city oriented, right? Bigger type city. So I don't think it works for a lot of stuff, but it does work regionalization in certain items.
Yeah, but you wouldn't be in favor of sort of talking about somehow we could just, instead of having all these functions done at the town level, save a bit of money and have it done, among multiple towns or even an entire county.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be in favor of that. But, there are other things like you talked about in terms of a mayor, and that's been talked about at different charter commissions. And I think it's pretty much a consensus that that's not the direction the town wants to go in. Yeah. Again, we want to be able to get the best person from around. Tony lives in Linfield.
Our town manager.
He couldn't be a mayor, right? Yeah. And you don't want necessarily the most popular person in town or the, whatever. You want the person that's the best person for the job, and we think a town manager gives us that opportunity to do that. There's maybe accountability when you're living in town and you're seeing people day in and day out, but I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing at all. I think the town manager is a good thing. I think a council form of government is a very good thing. It's much more fluid. It's much more easy to maintain. Okay. Instead of having 300, if you have a representative town meeting, you could have just a plain town meeting. You could have 700-800 people on it. And it's very cumbersome. It's very hard to organize, and it just slows processes down. Anytime you need money, you have to get together all those people.
So one of the referendum questions was to increase the pay. Oh, it didn't directly do it. It sort of made it easier to increase the pay for council members. Yeah. It's like, was it 50 a week and 100 a week?
It's $50 a week for a councilor, $100 a week for a council president.
So just for comparison, Boston City councilors, I understand, are paid more than $100,000 a year each. It's a huge difference between. Yeah. I mean, what would you just say would you imagine as an appropriate goal for a proper pay level for a councilor?
I still think, I don't see that changing anytime too soon, I don't think. But I think with an appropriate range, I think a councilor should be making about $10,000 to $12,000 a year maybe, and a council president maybe $18,000 to $20,000 a year, something like that would be appropriate. But the thought there, I guess, the thought would be that you'd have people maybe more qualified that would be willing to put in the work and the effort if there was some sort of pay there. When we created the charter, one of the first things we did that we were 100% on is that no councilor is eligible for health insurance, which still is the case. Mm-hmm. And they're not technically considered a town employee in that respect, right? So they're not eligible for that. But the thought was select people at the time were all volunteers, as the school committee still is now. Right. So we wanted to put something down, and we put a nominal fee, and that hasn't changed in 20 years. Should it change? It probably should. The question on the charter, on the election that just passed, made it a lot simpler, right? Yeah. Instead of now the council can vote a raise for themselves, and this is mandating that every couple of years they look at it to see. It still would have to be approved by the town at its next biannual election. Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Can I ask you about the campaign? So one of the numbers, I guess, I gather from the reporting, you spent about $14,000 on the campaign, and your opponent spent about $21,000. She outspent you according to the numbers that seem to be publicly posted. Yep. Just wondering if that's your understanding, and are those numbers much bigger than we've seen in the past? And what do you make of that sort of level of involvement?
I really never usually look at the other side, but I did see that number, that 21,000. So I can't talk about other people's campaigns. I could talk about my own and say that it's, the 13 or whatever thousand I spent is almost double than I've spent on any election in the past.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things that and the salary issue get to is the ability of people in town to participate on the level you're doing. I mean, you've mentioned that you're largely retired, and other people have other situations that they can afford to serve on the council and only be paid these nominal amounts. And I'm just wondering, is there any concern that leaves out a whole bunch of people in town who might want to do what you're doing or other people on council are doing, but just like.
Oh, I think 100%. I think you're 100% right with that. Right. You look at, you talked about the city of Boston. Look at the city of Revere. My understanding is that a councilor makes, I think they get a $900 a month allowance to spend on council-related items. They get full health insurance, 100% paid, and they get a roughly $26,000 a year stipend. So that's well over 60 grand to be a counselor. And I think, there's a lot more accountability to them, right? That you got to hold their feet to the fire a little bit more, even though we should be doing, I like to feel that I do the same work for $100 a week than I would be doing if I made, $500 a week, because that's the passion, right? I mean, you shouldn't be here just for the money, and you shouldn't be here because it doesn't give money or whatever. You should be there because you love the town, and I think that's what happens in most small towns. There are weeks that I put in 30 to 40 hours a week doing this, and there are weeks that I probably put in 10. Right. So, but I do think you will get, and that's the whole point, you will get a better quality candidate overall if there was a different pay scale.
So also on the election, now we talked earlier about the issue of slates, running as slates, and you kind of said that you didn't really look at it that way. But I mean, there were certainly around town ads that listed you and other members of the slate, if you will. So I just maybe just to dig into that a little bit more in terms of what the voters of the town should make of that. First of all, is that a new trend as far as you can see in Winthrop, that sort of collections of candidates running together for some reason, or has that been going on?
Well, I think to be a trend, it has to happen more than once, and this is the first time. Now, my campaign didn't have a slate. There were other people outside the campaigns that were running it as a slate, so to speak. On both sides, I think you saw that.
Yes.
Do I think it's something that's going to happen in the future? I don't. I think this was a unique election in a lot of ways, again, right or wrong, because of 3A. And if you look at that so-called slate, one side was pro-3A, the other side was anti-3A. So I think it was a slate in terms of pro-3A or anti-3A. I don't think it's a slate in terms of, overall thinking of more conservative, more liberal. I don't think it was like that as much as it was a 3A slate, if you want to call it like that.
Well, okay, I hear you, although it seemed like there were at least indications. I think it sounds like the slate, if you will, that your one seemed to be aligned with the Republican Party in town, and I know the other one was getting Democratic Party, or at least Democratic blue something money kind of thing. So it wasn't that as far as you can see. Was it partly that, or was it none of that, or how would you sort of see that?
I think that might be, I think people that are a little bit more conservative might be aligned a little bit more against 3A. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I know it isn't true 100%. But no, I don't believe it. I don't believe it was a conservative liberal thing at all. I think it was just a group of people that had a certain opinion on 3A. There were candidates that I know are very liberal that were anti-3A and very conservative that were pro-3A for different reasons, right? I just think it was something. I don't think it's great for the town to have a slate like that. I think it's just good to, hopefully, I am sure, and you could look at the numbers. The numbers, I didn't get the exact same amount of votes that Kurt got, let's say, two at-large candidates. At Kurt Millar, who I'm so proud of and ran a great campaign, and I congratulate him so much on the work he did. But there were people that I'm sure voted for Hannah and voted for Kurt, or voted Hannah Belcher and still voted for Kurt Millar because they align more. And you would think that people are voting for the person who they think is going to best represent them in different ways.
We almost have time, but I want to. Your party alignment is what?
I'm a conservative.
So does that mean Republican?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I didn't know because it's not clear whether that's.
Well, it's not. I'm a Republican because I've been a Republican since I was a kid. I'm not a Republican because of any affiliations right now. I'm a Republican because I feel I'm more conservative.
And you don't know if the slate that you were with that's not.
I do not know that.
Yeah.
No.
In the little time we have, I want to ask you about the schools because, as people may know, the town council president sits on the school committee. It's obviously half the budget of the town. Maybe a quick summary. I mean, where do you see the schools right now in this town? Do you feel generally pretty comfortable how they're doing and how the students are performing and on any basic measures of performance?
Yeah, So I'm never 100% satisfied with everything. I always want better. I mean, I think that's the way you get better as a town. I think the schools have done incredibly well. I think, the citizens of the town stepped up hugely earlier this year with an override, and I think that's going to carry the students and carry the schools forward over the next several years. It's different. Again, it's a small town. We have a superintendent like everybody else. We have, which right now she just submitted a resignation for the assistant superintendent, but we have one usually, if we have that. Other cities and towns have 2, 3, 4 chair people, like special ed chair people for each school. We have 4. Other cities and towns have 6, 7, 8. So we have just we have a small amount of people doing a lot of work. And I think they do a great job with with what resources we have. I think our kids go to great schools. I think they're incredibly well-behaved kids. I think a lot of that credit goes to the parents in the environment that we live in around here, that we're fortunate enough to live. But we have some great teachers. We have great administrators. And we have great buildings, right? We're pretty fortunate in a lot of ways for the size town that we have. And I know now some of them are 20 plus years old, but I still consider them 3 basically brand new schools. I mean, they're kept well. The kids have state-of-the-art technology there. And can it be improved? It always can be. Am I ever satisfied with SAT scores or MCAS scores or ACT scores? No, I'm never satisfied. I always want them to be better, but I think we do a fantastic job.
So there are contract talks going on, as you well know. Just so the basic summary, I believe I heard from the teachers, is that they simply would want they want them to be paid on a level comparable to what teachers are paid in surrounding communities. Now, what those numbers are, I don't know, but just as a matter of principle, would you support the notion that the teachers in Winthrop are paid roughly comparable to what teachers are paid?
No, I think it's apples and oranges. I don't think we can look at and compare ourselves to Revere or Lynn or Chelsea in terms of payment. There are areas of our contracts now where teachers are paid more than other cities and towns, especially in younger teachers in years 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where we tend to drop the ball a little bit is on teachers with more experience as they get older, and some of that is steps and lanes and how many steps we have, how many lanes we have compared to other cities and towns where we might be able to try to make some adjustments. But again, the bottom line is you're working here. It's a quality of life issue too. You're working in a great school system. You're working with people that the parents are involved, the parents care. It's a nice, safe community. You're not walking through a metal detector in the morning. There are a lot of pluses. And there's negative like anything else. My wife worked in this town for 40 years as a school teacher, and could she have gone to Revere and made more money? She absolutely could have, but she loves this town. She loves the kids of this town, and she did the right thing for her family, which she thought, and quality of life is a big part of that.
Okay, so your answer is that because of the various qualities of the Winthrop schools, teachers should accept lower money to teach here because it's better here than it is in
Well, I think teachers don't have to accept anything. There are job openings all the time in schools, right? I mean, there's superintendent jobs, there's principal jobs, there's custodial jobs, there's nursing jobs, secretary's job, teachers' jobs, ESP's jobs. So there's jobs everywhere, and there is definitely a difference in pay, sometimes just based on experience, qualifications, degrees, and sometimes just based on location maybe. And the difference is 10 or 15 years ago, we probably had 75% of the employees of the school that lived in town.
Yeah.
And now that's probably 30%, 33% maybe. So there's, less people living in town that work in town, which makes it harder and makes it more understandable when people are making that commute. Yeah. But we're trying, our thing is to be fair. I can't pay somebody what I want to pay them. I have to pay somebody what we can afford to pay them, or recommend that, right? The town just stepped up and gave the schools $4.95 million. And that there was an understanding there that there are certain restrictions that we have on what we can pay. It's not might not be what we want to pay or what we think they're deserving of. It's what we can afford to work in our town. And sometimes it hurts us because sometimes we're used as a stepping stone to go someplace else. Because at those early stages in somebody's career, we are very fairly paid in this town, in the schools. as teachers get older, there are definitely more opportunities.
So when does the contract expire, and how likely do you think it is that we are going to have a serious problem? But by that I mean potentially a strike.
Well, I really like to think that we are not going to have a strike. That is more up to the teachers, and I think the teachers have been working very hard with the school committee. I do not think that it's close. Some of the, there's different unions, right? So there's the teachers union, the ESP union, custodial union, and the nurses and secretaries and so on and so forth. Some of them are easier to settle than others. Some of it is just based on size. There seems to be, the teachers, the ESPs are going to be more difficult to come to a conclusion with.
This ESP, that's the special, what ESP stands for?
Yeah, they're teachers that are, fulfilling needs that they might not have the qualifications in terms of degrees and stuff as a full-time teacher, but they're more support.
Got it.
Okay, and they do an incredible job, and in different ways, just sometimes in just kindergarten or younger classrooms, sometimes with special needs students, one-on-one situation or small groups.
I wish we could keep going on, but we're going to get in one more, which is the Globe just did an analysis on showing school enrollment declines in various towns. They didn't look at Winthrop, but they did look at Revere, Chelsea, and Everett, among others, and found declines in student population. They talked to people who attributed that to immigration-related pressures. What's your sense on what's going on here in this town in terms of that factor for people, for kids and families in this town?
Well, I don't think it's immigration stress related in Winthrop, and I've said this 100 times, and maybe it's not exactly what you're talking about, but we have basically the same number of people in Winthrop now than we had 40 years ago. And in the 70s and 80s, the class sizes were 275 for a graduating class, upwards of 300. So now we have the same population, and the graduating class is 135, which in our situation is one of the highest we've had in the last 10 years. 12 years ago, we were under 100 people that graduated Winthrop High School. Yeah. So I think that is more of a sign, same amount of people, half the number of kids in school, I think that's more of a sign of an aging population.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So there's a lot more empty nesters living here, which tends to go back to the housing, lack of housing, because instead of having 5 people living in a house, you have 1 or 2.
And what's your take on the immigration situation in town? Does it feel like the people in Winthrop who come from different backgrounds are being treated well, I guess, or
I
feel
think they're
confident
treated incredibly well. Immigration is a national issue. It is not a local issue. Our police do not go around looking to pick up, nor do they have the power to go and pick up anybody. I think we're an incredibly welcoming town.
No, police definitely not doing that. What I'm asking is whether you see a degree of confidence among people in the town that they're okay. Whether they, it's a different, maybe can be a different question than what's really going on. But in terms of their sort of comfort in walking around and not feeling comfortable putting their kids in school and all that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can't put myself in their situation. To me, yes, but to them, I'm sure that it's a nerve-wracking experience and something that they live with day to day.
Is there anything the town could do to be more helpful with that?
I think the town's very welcoming, and I think the town does all it can do. I guess like everything else, right, that you always strive to be a little bit better, whether it be education, town, DPW, or in this situation, immigration. So there's always room to be better, but I do think we are a very welcoming town.
Well, Jim Letterie, the newly elected town council president of Winthrop, thank you very much for the time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.